security. That's how they framed it. Does that have to be more well thought out? Does that have to be more vetted in the future?
Well, I think the court was showing a lot of deference to frankly, to Congress in making that decision, and to the administration, the Justice Department, the intelligence agencies who would come forward with that conclusion, and basically said in that lower court decision that it really wasn't them on the role of the courts to second guess that national security concern that Congress and the administration had.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Let's get into also the term, as Biden's term's coming to an end. We'll know Trump is in the White House. We did know that the TikTok CEO, ByteDance CEO, was at Mar-a-Lago over the weekend. How might the changing of the guard from Biden to Trump change that, if at all?
Well, Trump flip-flopped on TikTok, right? He used to be against it in his first term, and then he last year flip-flopped at the urging. He had a donor who was one of TikTok's main American investors. He said this week he had a soft spot for TikTok. Ultimately, that doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot, and that's because the way that Congress wrote this law is mostly to be president-proof, either with Biden or Trump. That was by design. They didn't really want to give the president, any president, too much power. And so members of Congress who wrote the bill said, actually, this is on the app stores, Apple and Google, as well as hosting companies like Oracle. It's on them to comply with the law. And actually, last week, we saw members of Congress who wrote the law. They wrote to Apple and Google and they said, hey, by the way, you still have to comply with this. So I think that was a really interesting signal. And these companies are kind of getting buffeted on all sides by different political opinions.
Yeah, a lot of different opinions out there, and a lot of people trying to understand TikTok in its entirety because it's still very much in its infancy. And I do want to attack you because you said you predicted that they will uphold this lower court's decision. Once that happens, if that happens on January 10th or beyond, what happens? Are there any recourse for ByteDance or TikTok moving forward?
Well, this is what's interesting. So under the law, essentially, when January 19th hits, Google and Apple have to take TikTok off their app stores. And keep in mind, this is one day before Trump takes office, right? The law also requires that U.S. companies that might be hosting TikTok services, so this is probably Oracle, maybe other internet services, that they probably can't host them after that date. So it's very likely that Americans won't be able to access TikTok after that date, absent some last-minute plan to sell the company, which I think is very, very unlikely. And then, of course, Trump takes office next day. So, I think that then things could change. There's a little bit of a path. It's a very, very narrow path after that, though.
Yeah, it gets even narrower by the day with all these most recent decisions. And I do want to ask you about this, the divesting aspect of it, because that's what some of the courts have continued to lean on. Do you think that is a possibility? Is ByteDance even considering that option to stay in the U.S. market, to stay relevant? Because if it goes out of the market, like you mentioned, some of these servers, it could change because this moves so very fast. Do you think they might change their tune in terms of divesting?
Well, interestingly, the lower court said, look, TikTok, you've had plenty of time, right, to find a U.S. buyer. They just haven't done it. I think that speaks to the fundamental tension at the heart of this, right, which is that TikTok defenders say, well, it's just this harmless, video app. But then the Chinese government has said, no, this actually is a massive asset for us. Its algorithm is a national asset. We do not want it sold. And that, to me, just kind of undermines the argument that this is some harmless app, right? If the Chinese government cares so much and is going to work so hard to prevent the company from being sold, it really kind of validates the concerns of people who see TikTok as a tool, a propaganda tool for the Chinese government. So from a pure business standpoint, yeah, China should let TikTok be sold to a non-Chinese company. But from a national propaganda standpoint, I'm not sure they're going to allow that to happen. And the fact that they're not, kind of tells you all you need to know.
Yeah,
I don't think TikTok should be sold or banned.
People still trying to understand TikTok, and then this ban comes into place. But we do know that the Supreme Court will hear this case. That is a big step forward. Adam Kovacevic, thank you so much for giving us some insights and perspective here on Live Now.
Started as a hobby during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, has become a way of living for content creators Nikki and Jojo Scarlata, known on social media for their comedic impressions about New Yorkers and inflation.
With Nikki and I personally, we always use